I just we want to always give a shout out to the ladies who are working behind the scenes. So that's Elsie, Tara, Danielle, to make sure that these links to learning are set up in a good way, that they're topics that you really can benefit from. So thank you, ladies in the back end, doing some really good work and being diligent in what you're doing. So welcome. It is Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. It is our last links to learning of the month. So February's almost over, but we got a new month coming around the corner. So I hope the month has been well to you. I hope that because sometimes along the journey, sometimes that journey can feel lonely, especially in the winter months, the darkness, although that light is beginning to return. So know that you never walk alone in Creator's world. So I always feel it's important just to take a moment, take a breath, plant both of your feet on the ground, sit up nice and tall, maybe even closing the eyes, and take that deep breath in. Just acknowledge the gift that this day is. So we give thanks to Creator for all the goodness that is around us. We think of all our relations, the animals, the plants, the sacred waters, that sun that's still up there, shining. And then the grandmother moon will come into play later on this evening. So we give thanks for all of this beautiful creation that we're able to just enjoy and be part of. So thank you to Creator for the gift of another day. And here we are, links to learning. So I got some good news. I'm super excited to share with you all. I've been saying for a couple of weeks now, just to kind of prepare you all, that the links to learning was coming to a close, but the ladies decided that we're going to keep the Wednesday webinars. So we still have March to go. So we still have links to learning on Tuesday and Innovate BC on Wednesday till the end of March. And then we're going to transition till the end of the year, just to Wednesday afternoons, 2 p.m., 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So we still will have this beautiful community where we can learn, grow, have discussion, listen to the story, talk about economic development, build on our own capacity. So that is some good news we're bringing to you today. So I, for one, am excited that we don't have to say goodbye quite yet, although there's no such thing as goodbye in Cree anyways. So welcome. All right, so today we are talking about franchising with Steven Vanloffeld. So who is joining us from London, Ontario. So franchising. So this new research shows that franchising could contribute an additional $1 billion annually. Let me say that one more time. $1 billion annually to Indigenous economies if participation rates increased. So with over 1,300 franchise systems in Canada, there is no shortage of opportunity for communities to start businesses that can address economic leakage and better enable them to capitalize on development in their territories. So franchise systems can address the training, education, and capacity challenges many communities face. So today you're joining Steve, who is the founder and CEO of eSupply Canada, the only Indigenous-owned franchise system in Canada focused on Indigenous ownership. So I think it's going to be a great session. Again, I'm looking forward to learning more, building on my knowledge. So I have my pen, paper ready to go to take in the good knowledge that's going to be shared today. So I think we are in really good hands with Steve this afternoon. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you for lending your busy time, Stephen. And I'm just going to pass this virtual mic off to you. The floor is yours.
Great, miigwech, Michelle. I got to say that's the energy you bring. I don't know. Are you on radio somewhere? Do you do your own podcast? Because the energy you bring to this, just in that introduction, is I'm pumped. I feel like I've got something to say now. Wow, excellent. So good afternoon, everyone. Great to see all of you. My name is Steven Vanloffeld. I am Anishinaabe from Saugeen First Nation, Ontario, and I'll be talking about franchising as a path to economic development. So what I would encourage you to do, feel free to use the chat function over there. I want to hear from you. I do have a bit of disappointing news. You guys are the first group of people that I'm sharing this research with. So some of the stuff that I set up at the beginning, it talks about, economic development, which you guys are all aware of, but it kind of sets up my path to franchising and the research that we've done. So a lot of it is text heavy. I really tried to, there was really no way on this first iteration of the slide how to cut it down, but let's just have fun with it. And I'll leave some time at the end to answer any discussions. So my name is Steven Vanloffeld. As I mentioned, I'm Anishinaabe from Saugeen First Nation. I'm a former band counselor at my community. One of my portfolios was economic development, and that actually plays into how I got this, how I started eSupply Canada. Economic development and nuclear, I had a number of portfolios, but I took a particular interest in economic development, just given the development that exists within my territory. And so that really led into what what we'll talk about in a bit. I run this company. I run another consulting company as the founder and CEO of eSupply. I've gone through, I guess, a traditional, maybe a tech path. Participated in accelerators. I've been part of a number of pitch competitions. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of the POWA pitch. Came in 7th out of 1,634 in 2021. That was a fantastic experience, and won a couple of awards along the way for whatever's that worth. So before we begin, quick show of hands here using the raise hand function at the bottom. How many of you in your communities have economic development, comprehensive community plans? See a couple. And how many tied to those or independently, how many of you have economic development plans? Seeing a few over there as well, great. And now lastly, as part of those economic development plans, when you were developing them with your community members, how many of you seriously looked at franchising as a vehicle, as one of the vehicles for economic development? Chelsea? And that's kind of what I expected. When I sat on council at my community, I mean, when looking at all of the things that economic development officers have to look at, as well as, leadership, just in the community and the broader territory, franchising, I found, can play a phenomenal role in helping to develop entrepreneurship, but also economic development from a community and nation perspective. And we'll get into that. But first, let's just start with economic development planning. So, what is that? You all know, I'll be quick about this. I promise. There's a lot of words on here, but basically it's a strategic plan that focuses on the community or region's goals, strategies, objectives. It's focused on promoting growth, job creation, and improving the overall economy within the area. It can include objectives such as attracting new business, promoting entrepreneurship. Many of our communities and territories are within resource-rich areas. Entrepreneurship, I think, is really phenomenal. That needs to be expanded. Workforce development programs, infrastructure, so on and so forth. And it also might focus on ways to retain, expand, and attract new businesses to the area. So why is it important? Overall, it fosters economic growth, right? You're attracting new businesses to the community, to the area. That leads to increased employment opportunities, right? You're creating jobs, attracting skilled workers to the regions. Within my territory, we have Bruce Power, which is the largest nuclear power plant. We've had an influx over the past, I'd say, decade plus of highly skilled workers coming up to the area. We've seen housing prices increase phenomenally. I think when I went away to school in 2000, housing prices off reserve anyways were probably about 100 to 150,000 within the region. Now, if you're looking back in the area, they're 7, 8, 900,000 because there's a $20 billion investment in the area. It also promotes regional competitive, right? You're identifying those strengths, shoring up those weaknesses within either the community or within the territory. You're also encourages investment. Having that plan says that this community, this area, they know their strengths, their weaknesses, and where they're going, and they have strategies to address those. And all of this ultimately leads to an enhanced quality of life, right? Increased employment, increased wages, and it just increases the quality of life among citizens within your territory and community. This here is just a schematic of another community's thematic areas around what they looked at, developing talents, industry growth within their region, focusing on entrepreneurship, diversity and inclusion was also important to them, and then workforce development. All of these areas ultimately, when a comprehensive approach is taken to it, leads to increased per capita personal income, and greater employment opportunities throughout. So you guys know all of that. Just wanted to set the stage before we move into franchising. Really, what is it? You guys, when you think of franchising, I'm sure most of you think of the big brands, right? The Tim Hortons, the McDonald's, the Subways, the Petro-Canadas, the Shells. Those are, those have scaled through franchising. You have local owners out there. And what makes franchising an interesting path to entrepreneurship as well as economic development is this line right here, right? You're in business for yourself, not by yourself. And I'll touch on why that's important. As I have scaled eSupply Canada, it's been a lonely journey often. It's been a lot of early mornings, late nights, building this up, overcoming challenges. One of the benefits of franchising is that those systems, processes, procedures have already been pulled together for you, right? So it de-risks the business and it creates systems, tools that can make the path to business success a lot easier. And we'll get into some of those benefits. So what is franchising? Ultimately, it's a business model in which the franchisor, the person that started the business, grants the franchisee with a license to use its trademarks, right? The Tim Hortons brand, the Molly Maids brand, the business model, the operating system, and to sell those products or services under that franchisee's brand. You operate within a territory, and you are the local franchisee selling whatever products or service it is. In exchange for that, right, the franchisor pulled all the training and all these systems, procedures, the supply chains together. You don't have to do that. So in exchange for that, the franchisee pays an initial fee, typically the franchise fee, and it can range from, $5,000 right up to, $1 million plus, depending on the location, the type of business, whether or not there's any capital or long-term leases that are required. Think of Tim Hortons, for instance. You're looking at 20, 25-year leases on those buildings. So that's going to increase the initial franchise fee. Whereas if you're looking at something, let's say a Molly Maid, for instance, you can get started with relatively little investment, right? So it's learning the systems or the procedures, but ultimately someone's pulled that together. So you're paying an initial fee plus ongoing royalties to the franchisors. In exchange for that, the franchisor provides franchisees with a range of support, right? From training to systems to procedures, policies, templates, you name it. Their whole business model switches when they become a franchisor. Whereas before they were an entrepreneur growing a company, selling products or services or whatever that is. Once they become a franchisor, yes, they need to make sure that all of this is packaged and that the supply chain is there. But really, it becomes about putting a network of support around the franchisees. Scale comes through the successful businesses that the franchisees have within their territory. So you better believe that the franchisor is doing everything that they can to make sure that you as an owner has all the tools and supports and training that you need to get out there and drive revenue within your territories, communities, because that's where their success comes from. But ultimately, you're responsible for the day-to-day operations. Let's look at franchising in Canada. There are over 1,400 different franchise systems. Call that brands. But what they are systems, right? When you become a franchisee, you buy into whatever program it is. They have a system that they have already proven they've built out. And you need to be coachable and trainable to follow that system. It's basically, the path that has worked, and to replicate that path to increase success. So over 1,400 different systems in Canada, and we'll touch on some of those in a bit. Over 78,000 franchise units are operating in Canada. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. Those franchise systems and units collectively employ over 1.9 million Canadians, right? That's phenomenal. Generating over $100 billion in sales, and that's in 2019. In the tax revenue, the GDP contributed 65 billion to Canada's GDP. They support over 300,000 small and medium enterprises. That's through whether they need office cleaning or whatever it is that they need, the franchisees need in order to keep their lights on. They're purchasing those products and services as well. So there's a multiplier effect within the economy. And what we see is that franchising has increased 38% between 2010 and 2020, right? More people are moving into entrepreneurship, and that's definitely true with our peoples, right? I mean, I think we've seen a number of stats coming out from both CanDo and a number of other organizations looking at Indigenous entrepreneurship, particularly when it's tied to our growth rate, right? We're the fastest growing demographic population, within Canada. And so a real opportunity, and more people looking to get into entrepreneurship. What I'm doing is, how does is promoting franchising as a path less traveled, but one that has, I think, less barriers. So now that we've looked at the Canadian economy, let's look at franchising within Indigenous communities. So currently, there are only 2 Indigenous-owned franchise systems in Canada, and let me qualify that, who are members of the Canadian Franchise Association. So just like CanDo is a member organization, the Canadian Franchise Association is a membership or organization that does advocacy and all of that for franchise systems in Canada. eSupply Canada happens to be one of those 2. There's another, I believe they're an Indigenous-owned bakery in BC that are a member. So of course, as soon as I signed up, I'm like, who else is in this eco space that I can chat with? Who's been doing this? And there's sadly only one other folks out there. So if you guys own businesses and you're looking for a way to scale, seriously consider franchising. But that really represents less than 1% of all franchise systems in Canada. It's actually 0.17. Like it's minuscule. And what we need to do is, we've got some great businesses out there. How can those business models be replicated so that they can be exported to other Indigenous communities? Because there's a lot of great work going on, in the resource sector and other industries. A lot of those models, if the time is taken, is how can that be packaged so that other communities can benefit from that and start creating jobs and growing wealth within their economies. Number of franchise units is really unknown. I couldn't find anything about that. But when you think about franchising within First Nation communities, a lot of the communities, you think of the big, well-established brands, Tim Hortons, Petro-Canada, but few have those. And why? The barrier to enter is so high because of the cost of capital. The challenge around infrastructure within communities makes it a challenge. You need to build the building within the community. You need to be located, you need to be located across a major thoroughfare, or at least have a decent amount of foot traffic, because ultimately you might want let's say a Tim Hortons, but the folks at Tim Hortons that actually grant the license, you better believe that they're only going to go where there's enough people in order to make that business viable. Nobody wants the business to fail. So they can, if you just don't have the foot traffic or the traffic, within the area, they actually won't happen. but also the startup requirements for these large brands. You're looking at 1, 2, 3 million plus. Can make it really an insurmountable challenge, both from a community perspective, but definitely from an Indigenous entrepreneurial perspective as well, right? But that's just looking at those big brands. So we'll get on to some of these other brands in a minute, because as I mentioned, everything ranges from like $5,000 right up to those big ones. So there's a whole wealth of systems out there. But what we found is that if Indigenous participation rates increased, franchising would represent an additional 1.5 billion directed towards Indigenous economies. So it's even greater than what Michelle had mentioned, and that was not her fault. I think I sent that in and as part of my bio, so that's on me. But I mean that's substantial. Right. And I think that, if participation rates also increase with the rate that the Indigenous economy, because the Indigenous economy is expected to grow from currently $49 billion a year to $100 billion a year by the year 2024, at least that's a projected. So if franchising kept pace, if Indigenous entrepreneurs and Indigenous communities became franchise owners on pace, then it would see up to an additional 4.5 billion going to Indigenous economies. That's substantial, right? So what are the benefits of franchising? I've touched on a couple, but it's an established brand. You're not building something from scratch, right? I have faced so much risk in terms of building eSupply. It has been scary. I don't, my business model kind of reduces a lot of that risk, and I'll touch on that in a couple of slides. But this is a proven system. Somebody else has already created a great business model. They've got revenue. As a franchisee, you can look at the financials from it, so you get to see if it's in there. But that's already proven, so you're not starting it from scratch. You have access to supply chains that you might not otherwise have access to. For instance, I started this business, I started eSupply just as the pandemic was starting. We sell office, janitorial, and industrial supplies. Through our industrial supply chains, we had access to PPE. So we were able to pivot, support communities, support governments. Had I not have started this business, I wouldn't have had access to those, right? But when we're not in the pandemic, on industrial sites, gloves, masks, goggles, et cetera, are typically used on industrial sites for, any number of reasons. We had access to them. This is important. Franchising provides extensive training and support to franchisees. As I mentioned, the franchise system, the franchisor is only as successful as their franchisees are. So again, you better believe that they're putting whatever supports that you need, training and supports to ensure that you're successful, because that's where their revenue comes from, right? Is ensuring your success. But this is also important when you look at the gap in education between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians, right? There's a significant gap when you look at high school graduation rates, both on and off reserve, and then when you look at post-secondary graduation rates. Not to say that this is a solution to that, but because of the training and the education that's actually provided, you don't need a fancy degree in order to sit there and in order to be a great business owner. You need to be coachable, follow the training, so it can address to a degree some of those education gaps. Marketing and advertising to support the franchisees. More often than not, you're not out there having to set aside your own budget and manage it and do all the ads. They take care of that for you. You typically pay a marketing advertising portion, within your monthly fees that actually goes to supporting that. And easier access to financing, since lenders may view the franchise as a lower risk and may provide investment in a startup business. So I'm just going to pause there. Take a quick look over here. Yep, Kukuli Cafe, that is correct. Keep an eye on the chats over here. So keep it going, folks. I do want to, I will pop in over here throughout. So let's look at the market size, right? This is where we begin to take that 40,000 foot view and look at really the opportunity that's out there. So 634 First Nations, over 50,000 Indigenous businesses. The latest report, I believe this is 2022, December 2022, 49 billion in community, Indigenous government, as well as household expenditures. That's massive, right? I think that's over the GDP of, I think, the Atlantic provinces, if I believe, if my memory serves me correct. So we've got 49 billion growing, expected to grow to 100 billion. When we look at resource permits between 2021 and 2031, according to Natural Resources Canada, there were 443 current or planned major natural resource projects. Everything that happens in Canada happens within one of our community's traditional territories, right? And the collective economic contribution of that is 540 billion. And a lot of industries are looking to hit, take the government's lead and to hit a 5% procurement spend, right? And the governments have made that commitment going back to 2018, I believe it was. So when the last data I saw was 0.32, going up to 5%. So that's all crown corporations, that's all government departments. And that will lead to an additional 1.1 billion. So collectively, when you look at that, the market size of the Indigenous economy is $53 billion annual. And from an economic development perspective, a lot of that is focused internal and within your territories. And that's why, I've been promoting franchising as a path to economic development. So I'm just going to use my own territory as a kind of a quick case study here. So I'm from Saugeen First Nation. We're an Anishinaabe community. We're located on the southern shores of Lake Huron. It's about 2.5 hours northwest of Toronto. We're right on the shores. It goes up to the Bruce Peninsula over there. It goes over to Collingwood, where Blue Mountain is, and down to Godrich. So we've got a lot of industry. And as we look at that industry from an economic development perspective, we've got tourism. Bruce and Greek County are always looking at quantifying how many tourists come to the area, because we're a big cottage area. Our Saugeen is, we have about 1,200 leases for cottages on the shores of Lake Huron. It brings in, I don't know, upwards of 10 million a year to the community. But collectively, tourism contributes $300 million to the local economies. So again, what do tourists need? How can we start to serve that and drive revenue and business development from the tourism? As I talk in land lease over there, we have 1,200 cottages within my community. It's over 10 million to the band. Agriculture, we've got 1,928 farms. We produce 22% of Ontario's beef. What supplies and services do the farmers require? Nuclear is by far, the biggest impact to the local area. 30% of Ontario's electricity actually comes from the world's largest nuclear power plant, Bruce Power. That's, I don't know if you can see my little arrow over here, but right over there, about 30, right on close to that little point over there. So it's about maybe 30 kilometers outside of my actual community over here. So you head down Highway 21, it's right over there. But it's the world's largest nuclear power plant. It's a $20 billion refurbishment to extend the operating life of the nuclear reactors. And they've had over 40 plus nuclear suppliers actually move to the area. Now, the direct and indirect investments from the nuclear sector within the territory ranges from $1 to $2 billion annually. That's just in the territory. So you get to see why those housing prices have increased so far. But again, because my community, like many communities, has few businesses, we haven't been able to fully capitalize on development within our territory. That's why franchising can provide a quicker path to economic development. And then manufacturing, we've got 12% of the workforce, 1.5 billion in exports. So looking at that, you begin to say, if this are the industries within my territory, how can we create businesses to drive revenue, create jobs, to improve quality of life for our citizens? And so that's why I think where franchising can play a role. It's not to be all end all, but to be part of the mix, absolutely. And let's just look. So these are the franchises by industry, when you go on the Canadian Franchise Association. So, using my community as a case example, right? We've got, where would I begin? I don't know, maybe building and design services, maybe some business services, definitely commercial janitorial services. We've got a lot of businesses that have popped up over there. Residential services, custom deck, we've got cottages out there. Event planning. Our community is always hosting events, being contracted from outside of the community. Can we bring that internal? Employment personnel. So there is a wealth of sectors over here that once you get, a sense of exactly what those industries are, what they need, how can you be strategic in terms of identifying those franchise systems to go out there and attack those industries? And that's why I've been promoting franchising as a path, not the path, but as part of the mix. But of course, like everything, there's always a downside to franchising. Not just going to talk about all the great things, because there's definitely a lot of challenges as well, particularly if you're an entrepreneur through and through. Entrepreneurs don't like to be told what to do. They want to create their own things. They want the freedom that comes with it. With franchising, you have limited autonomy, right? Like you're following a system, right? You need to follow how the business is laid out, the plans, the policies, procedures, because that's what works. So really, you can't deviate too far from there. If there are, there can be chats and then repercussions. The initial investment can be high, depending on what you're looking at. But as I mentioned, there's a whole wealth of products out there, but this is one. Particularly if you're starting a restaurant or one of those brands that require a long-term lease, it can be a high investment. So just look at what's out there. Restrictions on suppliers, you can't bring in your own suppliers, even if you get it cheaper. The system is the one that goes out and gets it. And within the agreement, they compel you to purchase from them or from their suppliers. Your territory could be limited. Like we come from a community, we have our traditional territories. The franchise territories might not likely won't parallel your traditional territories. So you'd be limited in terms of your geographical area and where you can sell, unless you wanted to purchase multiple territories. And the potential for disputes. Somebody sold into my territory, or, their head office is over here, but, they're actually selling over here. And there's a whole range of disputes that can come up with franchisees. So those are some of the downsides, but, I'm biased, of course. I have a franchise. I think the upsides, far outweigh these that can be managed with when you approach it with open eyes. So I've got how to evaluate a franchise over here. Do the homework, look at the financials. Speak with other franchisees, see what kind of support they have. Look at the brand strength. Right? How long have they been around? Industry trends. Where are things trending within your area? Are there territory restrictions that are really, unpalatable to you? You want to know that, and definitely, you can't move down the path without looking at the franchise agreement, but get to know that agreement. The franchise agreement is the Bible. It's what sets the relationship up. It's how disputes are handled. All of the information that is in that agreement, you're going to want to read. You're going to want your lawyer to read. And there's a lot more other things, but this is a good, a good framework for when you're looking at franchises. So that brings me to my journey with franchising. So the problem that I saw, as I mentioned, when I sat on council, is our annual budget was, we had revenues of 32 million. We had expenditures of 27 million. We have one gas station in my community. So where do you think that revenue flows to? It flows to the surrounding non-Indigenous towns and retailers. And I found that those retailers, we're in a rural area, like racism is alive and well, unfortunately. And I said, we've got a $27 million stick. We need to start using that as a community. We need to hold them to account. And we can do that by stop shopping at these places and then ultimately create our own businesses where we're bringing that revenue in-house and reinvesting back in our citizens and reinvesting back in our community. So what are we purchasing from outside of the community? We can begin purchasing from ourselves. But because we have few businesses, again, it leaves And we're not able to fully capitalize on development within our territories, either through procurement or partnerships, right? Bruce Power, $1 to $2 billion annually. They want to be able to support the communities and support entrepreneurs. We have a gas station. We have 3 gas stations when you add in the 2 that a couple of members own. But you can, few people are going to drive 50 kilometers in order to get lower gas, right? They're going to go past many. So we're not able to capitalize on those real opportunities that are out there. And the federal government is really struggling to meet its 5% Indigenous procurement commitment. So these were the problems that I saw initially and sought out to address through what would become eSupply Canada. And so what we're a national online distributor of office, janitorial, and industrial supplies. I like to say there's nothing sexy about the business that I started. I didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I want to sell office supplies. I didn't at all. But I saw where our revenue was leaving from the community. As I was thinking through this, Staples came waltzing in. I think it was like the 3rd time that week, right? And I said, how much are we spending on office supplies? And my community on reserve is about 800. Our office supply spend was about $200,000. And I said, wow, that's 200 grand leaving the community. I'm going to hit them up for a donation to our toy drive at Christmas. Well, I went over to the local brick and mortar and I was told basically to pound sand and go and apply online like everybody else. And that left a really bad taste in my mouth. And so that was really what led to becoming eSupply. We carry over 1 million products from over 1,000 manufacturers. I've just signed a new agreement with an international computer distributor. I've also just signed an agreement with Vistaprint. So when you think of all the stuff that Vistaprint offers, that will now be integrated into our website. As I mentioned, actually, as Michelle mentioned, we're the only franchise model that's focused on Indigenous ownership. I created this company because I saw an issue at the community level, both from the community and from an Indigenous entrepreneur perspective. And so franchising is a way for me to bring this back to community. And our new owner training program I developed with Fanshawe College here in London. It helps address the training and education gaps that exist. I'll show you the 4-day training program in a minute. Our business model is drop ship. And so what that means is I go direct to manufacturers and national wholesalers. That de-risks the business. I don't have to carry a bunch of product that may or may not sell. My suppliers give me their product and pricing files, and I upload that to my system. So when an order is placed, only then do I push it. My system speaks with our supplier systems through electronic data interchange. So when an order is placed, I make sure there's no fraud on it. We approve it. It's immediately pushed to our supplier's warehouse to be picked, packed, and shipped that day, as long as it's in stock. So we never touch a product. We don't have to warehouse it. That allows us to be competitive with those big box retailers out there that have the big warehouses. We lean on our supplier networks. I like to say we've got coverage from the work site, or call it from the band office to the work site and everywhere in between, because we really do. Most orders ship same or next day. And we're able to give back. We've set up the eSupply Future Leaders Development Fund. So this is 1% of net profit goes to the eSupply Future Leaders Development Fund. And when I set this up, I was very intentional about who we're going to support. We focus on Indigenous students pursuing business, economics, law, as well as the trades, right? High opportunity sectors for Indigenous peoples, but particularly those ones over there, business, economic, law, and the trades. We're still largely contracting non-Indigenous people from the cities in order to do a lot of this work. If we're intentional about who we're targeting, if we can get more business people, we can get more lawyers, more economists, we can keep that revenue in-house. We have funding to support Indigenous entrepreneurs. So actually that pot is split, and we make contributions to Indigenous entrepreneurs. And our website actually gives Indigenous manufacturers the opportunity to sell their products through our website. And I don't know why I deleted the slide that actually showed the website, but go on esupplycanada.ca and you can see it there. It's clean, it's crisp, it's sleek, over 1 million products. We need to invest in our technology because we do compete with those billion-dollar industries. And we actually need to keep our pricing needs to be on par. No one cares that we're Indigenous if we're coming even 2 points above the big box guys. right? And through our business model, we're actually 8 times out of 10, we're actually beating them. Our growth strategy actually is to franchise. We want to be the locally owned wayfarer of our supply categories through local ownership. We've got a target to hit 200 locations, focusing on Indigenous as well as local ownership. We've got a low barrier to entry, a complete training system. This is our franchise portal over here. Go on, check it out. As we mentioned, the franchise system is only as good as the support that you put around your franchisees. And so I've created a network of support. As I mentioned, I've developed a 4-day training program with Fanshawe College. You fly out, come to London, and we put you through the paces for 4 days on learning the system over here. You get a micro credit at the end of that from Fanshawe College. We also have access to, I've got a separate learning management system. So there's curated content around sales, account management, you name it on there. I did an MBA at Smith School of Business. So we have access to a number of supports over there to support communities, to support entrepreneurs, access to interns, you name it. BDC, we've set up a partnership with them, how to access funding. MNP, they're one of the top advisory and accounting firms over here. We want to make sure that we're doing things properly, and so we've invested in a reputable company. Tech Alliance, it's a local tech hub and network within Southwestern Ontario. That's where I went through the accelerator program when I first started the business. And then we're a member of the Canadian Franchise Association. So you have to go through a phased process in order to become a member. And that just says that we are who we say we are. Here's the new owner training program, right? This is the 4 days where you come out, welcome and introductions. How do you prospect? And we go into learning the website and training. How do you do research when you're preparing to get an appointment with a potential prospect out there? How do you get that appointment? We work on your sales presentations, overcoming objections. How do you close the deal? How do you follow up? We work on your pitches on the final day, putting it all together, and then developing your path to success. In the evening on day 2 and day 3, you're identifying those top 100 businesses within your area. Who they are, what are they looking for? What is it that you might be able to sell to them? So that way, come Monday, when you go back to your territories, you can immediately call them up and say, hey, and you've already got your list, so you can hit the ground running. So what does that look like? And I actually have another business model. I won't get into that, but this one is just focused on Indigenous community ownership. So this one is focused on either ECDEV or the business development corporations owning the business. It gives communities the opportunity to earn revenue by purchasing the supplies from themselves. So that office, janitorial, industrial, the marketing material, whatever communities are purchasing, now they have a vehicle to earn revenue by purchasing that for themselves. If you have any impact benefit agreements, there are some great JVs, IBAs that are out there focused on long-term generational wealth and partnerships. But there's also an opportunity to enhance those agreements by tapping into this lower hanging fruit, which is the supplies that they use, right? Opportunity to take advantage of that. If there's other local procurement opportunities or development happening, communities now have a vehicle. And as I mentioned, the barriers that some of the other systems prevent is really not an issue here. It's a flat fee, $25,000 for a 5-year agreement. That's a one-time fee. So, I've spent so much money getting this business up and running. It's, I'll be paying it off for years, but as a franchisee, you get to benefit from all the training all the stuff that we've put into it. What does that look like from a franchisee perspective? It's 15% gross on everything you purchase or sell. We subtract these fees, 2.5% for advertising, because we're building a world-class brand. 1.5% for credit card, and everyone contributes to that Future Leaders Development Fund. We all want to be contributing back to community, right? So the franchisee nets 10% at the end of the day. What does that look like? Some people might think, well, it's 10%. Well, let's use my community as once again as a case study. As I mentioned, this is Saugeen's revenue, 32 million. Here's our expenditures over here, 27 million. But here's a little line item that I like looking at right here: materials, supplies, and rentals. That's $4.1 million that the community is spending on materials and supplies just to keep the community operating, right? It's $4 million. I mean, it's a lot more than that, but just looking at this line item, that's $4 million leaving the community. Now, going back to that 10% back revenue model, that's almost $400,000 back to the community. How could that be reinvested, right? As opposed to going to the big box retailers. And that's just looking internal. That doesn't take advantage of all the opportunity that now through this vehicle can approach the Bruce Powers, can approach the other developers in our territory. Maybe you're thinking, Saugeen's an outlier. Maybe they are, but maybe we're not. Because here's another community, 3.8 million. So again, 380,000 back to the community from a vehicle like this, and even more, right? If the community is, if that's the vehicle, and you're speaking with your citizens around, we have this vehicle and we have access to all of this, it's keeping more revenue even from the household expenditures within your community going back in there, on top of the own community government sales, as well as anything within the territory. So it's a great model. And we're bringing this to communities right across Canada. Just started. You guys are one of the first discussions that we've had around this. So love your feedback on the talk, and maybe where I can cut some, but or where I can shed some more information. We were on probably the first and to this point only Indigenous business that was on the cover of the Canadian Franchise Association. That's pretty phenomenal. Happy to be blazing that trail, an ad that we place in there. There's a local opportunity. I'd like to highlight this because these agreements are in place, within most communities, at most major industrial companies. This one just happened to be mine. This is Bruce Powers local Indigenous procurement policy. I've already touched on this. 40 major industrial companies as part of the Bruce Powers Indigenous Relations Supplier Network. They have a buy local and buy Indigenous policy for suppliers. So when their suppliers are bidding on RFPs and these contracts, if they can prove that they've partnered with a local Indigenous business, either a community-based business or an entrepreneur like myself, they'll be awarded higher points when they're bidding on those contracts. And all communities, most if not all, should have similar policies in place. I've actually negotiated an agreement with them. So they've actually, and this is a replicable model that you guys can use within your territories, with those agreements. So you can actually pass it, we've made the fee low enough, but you can actually pass those fees off to a developer that you want to partner with, and that wants to partner with you, and you haven't quite found the opportunity yet. So Bruce Power has committed to purchasing a franchise for my community and our sister community with whom we share the territory, because they want the communities to be able to participate in procurement and contracting. And they see that we already have access to these supply chains. So they've committed to purchasing that, right? We're tapping into some of those MBA students to identify, to develop the business plan, and to how do we operationalize, how does a community maximize this opportunity? Oversight committee. We actually have access to Bruce Power supply chain to acquire supplies at the rate that they get it for. I mean, that's kind of unheard of, right? You usually got to go to the market or your normal suppliers. We now have access at the price that this billion-dollar corporation is getting it for, to be able to acquire supplies at their price. We can then sell those, and the margin that we receive is actually split. Part of that goes into number 5, a joint community investment fund. The other part actually retains with eSupply, and other opportunities to operationalize this MOU. So, this is something new and exciting, and it can be brought to other developers out there as well. And we've actually set up a supplier portal for all of their suppliers, so we can track their spend. We can set this up for anyone. But again, as either folks are applying for the PAR program with CCAB, there's a third-party verification. We can easily export how much the spend is to ensure that it's meaningful and not $200, because believe me, a lot of companies will try to spend $200 and want to see you, claim you as an Indigenous supplier. So you got to be careful with that. But as they're bidding on Bruce Power contracts, they just call me up and say, hey, Steve, what's X company doing? They're bidding on this. Can we get an export of what it is they're spending to ensure that it's it's meaningful. So we've set that up as well. So, in conclusion, franchising can play an important role in local economic development. I'm pushing it, give it some thought, folks. The systems, tools, training, and supply chains can really help ensure business success. But weigh the pros and cons, right? Not every system is going to fit with your values, with the community, with your economy, but there's enough out there across 1,400. You should be able to find some that matches with the trends in the area. Not every opportunity needs to be $1 million. Don't let the Tim Hortons of the world scare you, because you can get one from 25,000, 5,000, you name it, across the whole spectrum. And from a leadership perspective, it does provide that opportunity to enhance IBAs. We have this, and now how can we take advantage of procurements within, through whatever it is that you might be offering, and ultimately take the time to do the planning and understand the sector, the business, and find a franchise system that matches within the market. So it's a lot of information. Really happy to have shared the first cut of our new research with you, and I'm going to pause it there and stop sharing the screen. See, we've got some questions. Are we getting a copy of this presentation? You bet. You bet. So I'm going to pause there and either pass it back to our facilitator or open up the floor to any questions you might all have.
That was a great presentation, Steven, giving us insight again to understanding franchising as a path, and you said it earlier on, not the path, but as a path to economic development. And I really liked the very first quote at the beginning, and then I'm going to open up the floor because we only have so much time for any questions. I really liked this quote: franchising in business for yourself, not by yourself. That was a big takeaway for me today. All right, so we're going to open up this floor. Any questions? I know that there was one earlier on about, here, let me just scroll up if I can catch it. What size of a community do you need to service in order to be successful? Oh,
I have a question around that question, but just in terms of time, I would say it really doesn't matter on the size of the community. It depends on the sectors within your territory, right? And looking around what's within my territory. I showed you mine as a case example: agriculture, manufacturing, nuclear. Understanding what all of those sectors needs, use, consume, and then being strategic around, okay, I know what they want, what they need, and now how can I approach franchising as a way to begin building businesses that can support that, right? Established brands and all that. So I would say you could be a small community, you can be a large community. It really depends on the sector within your territory. Hey, Bonnie.
Hi, thanks so much for this presentation. For you to continue teaching it and showing it, I think it's valuable for sure. And a business scholar and business owner, I have a lot of different questions, and we tap into, as entrepreneurs, we tap into expertise to study the financials beyond what the level is that I've studied. And so when we look at hiring out those professionals, what fees are you expecting someone to really put in their budget for not only that analysis, that higher prospecting analysis, the equations and percentages of revenue you want versus the population and markets you have, and then the legal aspect to sign up the franchise?
Yeah, so just using our process as an example, the additional fees that we've calculated in terms of setting up a business, setting up the banks, going through legal, purchasing the training, it's probably an additional $10,000 on top of the franchise fee, right? And then depending on, just using again mine as an example, depending on the model you take, one could be, how do you currently purchase those supplies internal to your community? Is it done through central purchasing? Is it done through each individual department has somebody that purchases, right? Because then it's a matter of training the people internally, and that's, part of the system, who's currently doing the purchasing. If you want to take more of an account management approach, then it's how much do we need to hire somebody from within the community to begin driving business development in the broader territory, right? So I think it really depends on the model, because if you have centralized purchasing, you don't want to put, now you're an account manager and go out into the community. You probably want to keep that as a separate and discrete function with somebody hired to do just that.
All right. Well, thanks, Bonnie, for the question. We have time for one more question. Sharon, I see your hand up. Come on in.
Hi, my name is Sharon, and I actually own Kukuli Cafe.
Oh, hey, look at that.
So yeah, it's kind of neat to be the first Indigenous franchise, I guess, in Canada. And we are growing. We've franchised 2 locations, and we get tons of inquiries all the time. And we are getting inquiries from Indigenous communities, and how we, like, it seems though that they always want all of our information first, the building, the equipment and what do they need. And so we kind of it feels like we have to give up a lot of our stuff in order to prove ourselves, I guess. And, but we are a solid organization, and we've really done our homework in the last 15 years to get to where we are today. And so we're just new and growing, and and it's a matter of also, people trusting who we are and what we have to offer. And so I'm just wondering, how do we establish that connection and relationship, and just, we just don't want to give it all away, and we don't cost $1 million, right? We're very, I think our price is really affordable, and yeah, so just how do we establish that, I guess, without giving it all away?
Yeah, I think good question. I mean, what we've done is we've taken, a bit of a different approach. I mean, we're a drop ship model. We actually promote working from home, because, all you really need is access to a computer. So we found that it can really bog down the process by putting the financial disclosure document right at the end. After this, we want to be upfront and work with them right from the get-go, knowing that we've got systems and processes in place. And it took you 15 years to get to where you are. If somebody can go out and recreate that, that's fabulous. Go out and do that within a 6-month period. But, we want to work with you to learn around all the stuff that, you've spent 15 years learning, right? There comes call it a what do they call it in the economic world? A learning premium, if you want to call it that you bring with that you can't actually get from until you're actually in the business. So long and short of it, I don't really have an answer, but I think it's working with your potential franchisees along the way, and share only when you're ready.
Good. Thanks.
And great to meet you, Sharon.
Good to meet you. Thank you.
Awesome. I think you can answer this one question, Steven, quickly. Franchises available for individuals, not just for First Nation councils?
Correct. We actually have a territory model as well, where we use Elections Canada electoral districts, because we can find out exactly how many registered businesses there are with the territory. And so we're selling that for all Canadians, not just Indigenous people. So we've got 2 models. I only focus on our community ownership one.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Today was a good day. It was good sharing, good knowledge. So thank you so much to our guest speaker. We honor and value your knowledge that you brought to us today. And in Ken's words in the chat box, thank you for discussing and exploring the franchising opportunity. Good presentation. So Miasin, it was good. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And you will get this presentation. You will get this PowerPoint sent to you. So you have that knowledge at your fingertips. So be well. Have a good rest of the day. Take care.
You watch, everyone. Thanks for joining.